Newsfirst, NEWSLINE with Faraz, Shauketaly.
Very good evening to you and welcome to NEWSLINE Live. Once again, I'm terribly sorry about the 4-minute late start. We are trying to sort it out. In the meantime, Sri Lanka has several problems on its hands, not least, of course, the pandemic, then we have the economy, and so on and so forth. But on top of all that, we have what appears to be some sort of legal challenges and some worry on that front. I am talking about the I do beg your pardon, I'm talking about the political victimization process, and I've got here a member of the previous government, Mr. Eran Wickramaratne, with me this evening. Very good evening to you, Mr. Wickramaratne.
Good evening.
What's going on? Is Sri Lanka headed back to 1978 when that government got rid of a political opponent, clearly, Mrs. Bandaranaike, by taking away her civic rights? Is that what we see in play right now?
Yeah, that's one way to look at it, because when you have strong governments, and in 1977 you had a strong government, 5/6 of parliament, majority, and then you have an opposition, and you deal with the opposition in a very high-handed way, and that ended up by Mrs. Bandaranaike, the former Prime Minister, actually losing her civic rights. We have a government which is strong in numbers. It has a 2/3 majority in parliament. It's not very cohesive. I think there are lots of divisions within the government as well. And what it's done is it's appointed this presidential commission, as everybody knows, to go into political victimization. It's interesting that they said that if anybody has any complaints, they have to make it before the 17th of March or something. But they were taking complaints right to the end. By Gazette, they extended the time of the commission twice, right? And ultimately, they came up with a report, and they have presented a report. Now, that report hasn't been tabled in Parliament, so as usual, we have a leaked copy, right, which is in the media. And today, right, the SJB MPs, we made a complaint saying that, this commission report is in contempt of court. You see, we actually we signed it. And the reason we said that is that has gone into complaints that are actually cases which are before the Sri Lankan courts at the moment. Now, I'm a member of parliament, and if there's a case going on in one of the Sri Lankan courts, right, I stay away from it, and I don't say anything that could affect it, because the judiciary is independent of the executive and independent of parliament. And once the case has been decided, I certainly have a right to basically critique it, right, and which we can do depending on the outcome of the case. So here these cases are there. Then there's a commission of inquiry, right, appointed by the president, and it's basically gone as far as saying that in different cases, named individuals, and they have named, like example, Basil Rajapaksa, Yoshita Rajapaksa, Udayanga Veeratunga, Jalia Wickramasuriya, right? And these people are all in one way or the other connected, related. And then there are other people as well, right, members of parliament, right? And they have named and said these people need to be basically recommending that they be released. Now, in my view, that's contempt of court, because it's before a court. And how can a commission, right, who just collects evidence, right, actually come to a conclusion like that, which they have done? Commissions are there to actually find out facts and go after the truth and make it known. Sentences, right, and judgments must be made by basically the courts, the judiciary. And we must be very strong in protecting the independence of the judiciary. It doesn't matter which government is in office. That's something we must uphold. And here, that's not happening. We've just heard a month ago about Ranjan Ramanayake being convicted of contempt of court, right? And there can be different opinions on that. But certainly, I think the criticism is not on the judgment. The criticism is often on actually the sentence that was passed on him. It was a 4-year
because,
sentence.
you know, we did have a monk who stormed a courthouse. I mean, let me get this right, because some people may not understand the ramifications. This monk stormed into a courthouse and proceeded to threaten one of the respondents, not, you know, a witness, and didn't get 4 years. That's my point.
Yeah,
because
so,
you know, what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander.
yeah, so the discussion is actually on the severity of the punishment,
Yeah.
rather than the verdict itself. There was a case, as you may know, in the Indian courts, where a person was convicted of contempt of court and was asked to pay, I think, 1 Indian rupee, and the individual refused to pay the rupee, and then judges were in a quandary, and they were debating whether the person should be sent to prison for 3 months because the person is refusing to pay a rupee, and admitting that, you know, it's contempt of court. So that gives you a bit of a contrast in what actually has happened. But I am contrasting that not with that, I am contrasting that with what has happened in the Presidential Commission. And then they said political victimization. Then there were cases there which had nothing to do with political victimization. There was one case with one member of parliament, Mr. Gamanpilla, where I think it's a private case because a foreign couple has taken up some case about something, it's a financial kind of matter and a transaction, right? And even that has appeared in this commission report. So they have gone into not just political victimization, but gone into private cases.
That's an interesting example that you brought in, because they're also proposing to prosecute these people who brought the complaints in. So in the case of Mr. Gamanpilla, as you say, it's like a private thing. It's nothing to do with the government of any day. And so we wonder if this Australian person is now going to be prosecuted for complaining against Mr. Gamanpilla. Well, that's, I'm sorry, but that's what it is. If they are going to, if they are proposing to send, to hold Ranil Wickremesinghe and Rajitha Senratne and all these others responsible for being in that infamous committee, then, as I say, what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. And therefore, then this hapless man who's probably lost his money and is complaining about that may well be hauled before the courts in Sri Lanka. I hope he's listening in Australia.
Yeah, so maybe I shouldn't have laughed. But I thought it was quite hilarious that you actually said it, because I hadn't thought about the foreigner being involved in that case. But the reason maybe I shouldn't have laughed is because
it's pretty serious.
It's a pretty serious matter that they are bringing people who are in the political opposition, and they are recommending, right, that it be explored, that the civic rights of the people you mentioned, like, I don't know, Rajitha Senratne, Ranil Wickremesinghe, then you have Mr. Sumanthiran, you have Mr. Anurukumara Dissanayaka, Mr. Partli Champika Ranawaka, and this is the opposition in this country, that their civic rights be removed. 1978, for 42 years or 44 years, everybody criticized that decision. Everybody.
Including Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa.
Everybody has criticized it on both sides of the
And interestingly, and I made this point yesterday, years later, when Mrs. Kumaratunga was in power and moved to cancel that in Parliament, you know, about her mum, and the United National Party didn't even vote against that move, which to me shows that as a party, they didn't really believe in what happened in 77 or 78. So only one member was allowed to vote, Anura Bandaranaike.
Yeah, so what this does show is that this government has got itself in a real mess. It's failed on the management of the COVID pandemic. It's failed on the management of the economy. It's failing on the management of foreign policy. And what it appears to be is, instead of focusing and getting those things right, it's going after the political opposition and trying to basically target the leaders of the political opposition to silence the political opposition.
But surely, is this what we need? Is this the need of the hour? We've got COVID-19 raging along, we've got vaccines to give out and so on. The economy is in a complete shambles. I'm not blaming anyone in particular, but this is the nature of the global economy. Some companies have made a lot of money and have done well and have gone with the flow of, because from every sort of dark cloud you get a silver lining and that sort of thing. But honestly, do we need this now? Is that the priority now?
Yeah, so as I said, I didn't know that, the government would be really focusing on the opposition. It shows a level of desperation for them to focus, because actually they should be focusing on the economy.
It is the same sort of thing that your Palane government did. Having been elected with being presented with several golden prospects, instead they completely failed in what they said, to hold these people accountable. Now it looks like these are doing almost the same thing again, but with a bit more bite.
Yeah, so I've heard that accusation often, that maybe justice, right, was not really pursued, particularly, and the delays in it during our period. But if I were to just comment on the economy, because this is really biting people. I was up in the plantations over the weekend. Yeah. I was in the Dehiyovita plantations on the Deruniagala side. I spoke to a lot of people. I thought those workers there were getting 700 rupees, and the finance minister Mahinda Rajapaksa in his budget speech said we are going to give them 1,000 rupees. I actually inquired on some of the estates. They were actually getting only 585 rupees a day. And those ladies basically told me that their expenses are closer to 1,500 rupees a day for the family, but they're only earning 585. And the gap, right, between income and expenditure, and they're really getting squeezed. And then if you go into the rural economy, lots of them don't have permanent jobs. Yeah. They don't have contract jobs. They don't have industries in a lot of those spaces. They are either plucking tea, or they are in cultivation, of pepper, and other things, and they are working on a daily basis. They get a daily income. The lockdown brought their income further down, and now with uncertainties, they don't have daily wages, often, and they are all getting squeezed. And the question is, the government does not have the fiscal space to actually protect them and provide them the assistance that they require. Yes. So the economy is in shambles. This government is thinking that by printing money, right, they will be able to get the economy moving, right? This is not going to happen. You see, this is not going to happen. As we know, the GDP growth rate fell drastically in the last period, right? And there will be some recovery, in 2021, but still the government is getting its policy wrong, right? So there is no investment coming into the country. Even the locals are not investing. The dis-saving is going mainly into survival mode. And they're following a policy which is not leading us anywhere. The international banks and the local banks, right? The non-perform. Today I heard a banker say that the non-performing loans were around 5%, the NPLs. And then they said on moratoriums, their portfolios are about 15%. Yeah. Now some of which will be recovered, but it's giving you a signal that the NPL levels will be higher, right? The government basically has been printing money, right? Normally, going with the economic growth rate, they would probably print 250, 300 billion rupees, and they have been upping it maybe all the way to 800 or 900 billion rupees. What's going to happen if there is no economic growth? Right? Either they have to take the money out of the system, or it's ultimately going to feed into inflation as well. So whichever way you look at how they are handling it, the economy is in a mess. It may get worse. And I might just conclude that on this comment, that if you take prices, right, we were fortunate that in 2020 because of the COVID. One of the pluses that happened was that oil prices came down. So you had a price of a barrel of oil at 30, 35 rupees. In 2021, it's going to be more like 60, 65 rupees a barrel, right? So your import bill is going to be higher as well, right? Therefore, the balance of payment situation is going to worsen. It will improve. If tourism, there's some kickback on tourism, it will improve. I don't expect actually remittances to go up, because remittance went up about 5% more than in the previous period, from about $6.7 billion to about $7.1 billion. But in this period, I don't, because about 100,000 Sri Lankans overseas lost jobs, right? So they remitted their money, but that revenue won't come. And then normally you would have 100,000, 150,000 going out and new remittances coming in. That won't be there in 2021 either. So the remittances situation is also going to look bleaker than it was in the earlier period. They keep telling us a fairy tale story on the economy.
Let's find out more about the fairy tale stories of the economy after the headlines for the primetime news.
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly. Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.
Welcome back to Newsline, the shortened edition of Newsline. Mr. Wickramaratne, there are several questions here. Some of them are quite fascinating, but I'll ask you one in particular. The person says that he's a gem merchant from Jintota in Gaul, and says that Mr. Cabral says that gem exports are currently 300 million and he's targeting 1 billion. He wants to know from where. Where can he export these stones to? Because apparently, according to him, and I quite agree, I'm sure you will, the global economy is down and gemstones will be the sort of the purchase of the last resort.
Yeah, so I think I'm free to laugh now.
Yeah, I think
right,
so,
on
yes.
that kind of comment,
Yeah.
right? Because I think that without tackling the fundamentals of the economy, right, just coming and telling people stories won't help. Ultimately, right, the economy has to grow. And for the economy to grow, people have to have confidence, and people have to start investing in it. You have to get your basically investment climate sorted out. The banks and every single bank report that's coming and every rating agency report is negative. Rating agency reports are basically that Sri Lanka is virtually on the brink, right, of default, moving from the B's into the C's. Right? Bank reports, and every week you get some bank, international bank also giving some report. There is no confidence, so the government has got its economic policy sorted out. Without tackling the fundamentals, ultimately, economy has to grow, you have to have revenue, you have to get revenue up, you have to bring the budget deficit down. Moving away from these fundamentals and trying to say that you can sort the issue out won't happen. Debt is high, right? And often debt has been looked at as a percentage of GDP. Sri Lanka has, after about a decade, gone up to 100% of GDP or thereabouts, right, in terms of its debt. But the more concerning factor is not the percentage of GDP, because you have very strong economies, which have 150, 200% like Japan of GDP, but their interest rates are low. Our Sri Lankan interest rates are more like about average, because of 50 years of concessional lending is more like 4. But the new loans in dollars are coming at 6, 6.5, and 7. The new loans on rupees are more like 9 and 10%. So our interest rates are high. In Japan, it's 0.5% or whatever. So the carrying cost is low. Then the worrying factor is on, because our carrying cost is low, as a percentage, debt payments, interest payments as a percentage of revenue has gone from the 30-40 range to like the 65-70 range. Those are the problems in the economy. So the fundamentals are not being tackled. And then you have stories like this. One day it's like in telling gems will go from 300 to a billion. Another day saying that tourism will rebound this year completely. These things just won't happen, won't materialize. because there is no climate for these things to materialize.
Fairy tales?
Of course.
How do we get out of this whole situation? What would you as a Sri Lankan, as a fellow citizen, what would your advice be to Mr. Cabral and company?
Not to Mr. Cabral, to the President, and I said this in Parliament, you see, and that was that he came saying there needs to be a system change. And my view was, you need to change your team, you see, because you can have the best policy in theory, and they certainly don't have the best policy, but you also need to have the right people to implement it. So you need a change of people, and certainly I won't disagree with the whole system change idea either, right? You need the changes. The President came, right, and has created very high expectations of professionally managing, right, the country and professionally managing the economy. They got it wrong from the start, you see, because if you are going to professionally manage something, you need to put the right people in charge of the right subjects and so forth. And they got that wrong. So that's very unfortunate. On the economy, I think that is one of the main issues on the economy. If you look at businesses, right, you made that comment right at the beginning, that some businesses are doing well, and that's correct. Because I would say about 30% of the businesses are doing well. This is a projection that a banker gave me, right, and he said from their experience, right, and then about 20% are even, pre-COVID, post-COVID are even, and about 50% of the businesses are doing poorly, right. So you have really a big problem on your hands, right, and how can you help those businesses?
Indeed.
Moratoriums have been given, right?
Yes.
Right, moratoriums have been given. They have been extended, right? And now a new extension is required soon. I remember being instrumental in giving the first moratorium straight after the Easter bombing. See, when the finance minister was out of the country and I was acting for him as finance minister, Mangala was out, and giving the first moratorium. And those are needed, and but there are limits to those moratoriums, you see. So another moratorium is required, it will be given. So you have a situation where, the recovery has to come in and incomes have to basically go up. That climate is not being fostered. So financial markets work on confidence, you see, and that confidence is lacking. So if your bankers don't have the confidence, the government hasn't been able to give them the assistance. They're expecting the banks to bail out these companies. Actually, the banks have done quite well. They've extended themselves quite a bit, the banks in this country, right? But there are limits to what banks can also do.
But all these little hoteliers and bigger hoteliers, their problems are merely being postponed. What is the government going to do with all these loans that are stacking up?
Yeah, so that is why I was saying is people, number one. Two is policy. Get the policy right, you see. There is no magic wand on the economy. It doesn't matter if it's this government or if it's our government. But we will focus on putting the fundamentals right. Because if you put the fundamentals, it will take care of itself.
Ram Vikramratne, thank you very much for being on this very short version of Newsline Live. Thank you. And that's the way it was. It's now time for the primetime news from News First. Take care, great evening, and as always, God bless you.